there's a little form that will tell us a little bit about you. It'll tell us a little bit about you. It'll also, start over. Hey, Community Church, welcome back. My name's Lou, I'm one of the pastors here, and if it's your first time, I'm glad you're with us this week. If you head over to our website, communitychurch.net/connect, there's a little form on there, and if you'll take just a minute to fill out that form, that will let us know that you were with us. We'd love to know when we have new people have us, and just to say thanks for doing that, we'll send you a little gift card in the mail, so make sure you run over to do that. We've recently expanded what we're hosting online every single week, so we've got the normal service for adults, then we have programs for preschool kids, for elementary school, for preteen, for middle school, and for high school. And so if you head over to communitychurch.net/media, you can see all of that. Even if you don't fall into one of those age groups, it might be cool for you to check that out. And feel free to pass that along to friends as well. If you know some people that you think would benefit from that, feel free to pass that along to them as well. But don't forget, we've got those programs for kids, people, individuals of all ages. So we're able to do everything that we do every week because there are so many people who have decided to partner with us financially, whether it's $5 or $500. There are people that give very, very generously every single week, and they make all this possible. And if you want to join that team that partners with us financially, you can do that over at communitychurch.net/give, but we're not big on arm twisting here, so please, if you're not a regular with us, if this is not your church home, please don't feel any pressure to give. We're just glad that you're hanging out with us this week. This week, you're going to hear a message that was filmed back in the days when people met in large crowds. And this topic that I had the chance to address last year, I think is one of the most important topics to address when it comes to Christianity as a whole. This lesson itself, though I wouldn't have phrased it this way at the time, for me, understanding this was life-changing. And so I wanted to show you this week before we dive into a new series next week, just because it's one of those standalone messages that I think really can help change the way that people think about God. So hope you enjoy it. I'm glad that you're with us again this week, and I hope that you enjoy this week's online service.
There is healing in the power of the Lord Most High. There is courage in the shadow of His wings. There is peace unending over all my life. There is freedom that washes over me. And I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. I open up my soul. You fill me up with all I need here in your presence, Lord. Where blessings overflow, there's always abundantly more. There is rest in the goodness of the Lord my God. There is treasure in the kindness of my King. There is comfort in knowing your unfailing love, and my provider, you set my spirit free, and I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. I open up my soul, and you fill me up with all I need here in your presence, Lord. Where blessings overflow, there's always abundantly more. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me, greater than than I imagined, more than I could ask or see, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined, more than I could ask or see, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. Ask or see, more than I can ask or see, more than I can fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined, more than I can ask or see, more than I can fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined.
Today, what I want to talk to you about is one word. One word. Have you ever thought about the weight that one word can carry? Ever thought about that? Right? Like maybe you've been in a courtroom before, you've seen a movie with a courtroom in it, and there's all this, kind of deliberation and talks and arguing and lawyers and whatever, and then at the end, the judge comes out and he says, the jury has found the accused guilty, not guilty, but it's one word that could totally change the direction of someone's life. Has anyone ever seen the movie Legally Blonde? Yeah? Men? Anybody ever made a sacrifice for a woman? Okay, so apparently in this movie, I haven't seen it, but my wife was telling me that in this movie there's a scene where there's a girl with a guy, and she really, really likes him, and she's super excited about the idea of spending the rest of her life with him, and he sits her down at this fancy restaurant, if you know the movie, and he just says, I really think that we should, and she's like ready to say I do, she's really excited, and he says, break up. And it's one word, or technically that's two words, right? But it totally changes the direction of life. It's one word. One word can carry so much weight. This morning I want to share one word with you. One word that has life-altering implications. This one word for me made a profound impact in my life, and what I've found is that some people had the same beliefs about this one word that I did for years, and seeing the implications behind this word can totally change someone's future. If you're somebody who's been inside the church for a long time, you're somebody who's or maybe not even a long time, but you're just somebody who's trying to follow Jesus. And maybe there are days when you wake up and you just don't want to do it, right? Or maybe there are moments where your faith just feels heavy, like it's something to carry, like we're constantly trying to meet these requirements. And if we're honest, there are just some days where it's like, I don't have the strength today to be a Christian. What I'd suggest to you is that this one word changes everything. Or maybe you're somebody who's outside the church. you don't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, maybe somebody dragged you here today, maybe it was a girl that you like or a guy that you like, and so you're in church just to kind of humor them. And maybe for you, you've kind of kept the church at a distance. I tried to avoid it, tried to avoid church conversations. What I would suggest to you is that this one word has the potential to totally change the way that you understand the Christian faith. It's one word that has life-altering implications. So we're going to look at this word. It's in a verse. We're just going to look at one verse today. And the verse comes from the book of Romans. Which is really not a book. It's really a letter written by a guy named Paul. Paul was one of the most influential church leaders who's ever lived. And now this is kind of hard to imagine, but when this letter was written, think about this. The church was like in its baby form. They had just had their grand opening a few years earlier. And there are these people in Rome that are trying to figure out what church is like. There's no Bible. There's no pastors that have been trained in seminary. It's just people that have heard stories about Jesus that are like, all right, let's try and do this Christian thing. It's new, but there's a lot of freedom. It's like, anybody ever go to Red Mango or Sweet Frog or one of those ice cream soft serve places? Yes? Do we have those around here? Yeah, okay. So I remember when I was growing up, I loved soft serve ice cream. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. But when I was growing up, it was behind a counter, right? And there were the trained professionals on the other side who had the ability to, crank the machine and make the perfect swirl. And then they'd like perfectly roll it in the sprinkles, and then they would give it to you, the unworthy ice cream person. But they were the only ones that can touch it. And then I remember one day I went for me, it was Red Mango. It was one of these places where you walk in, all of a sudden there's like half a dozen soft serve machines there, and I could just walk up to them and try and make my own swirl, and all of a sudden there's all this freedom that I've never had before. And then you go to the topping bar, and you can plop on whatever you want there. They got graham crackers, bananas, Reese's, right? There's all these crazy toppings, and it's all this freedom I've never experienced before. It's like, what do I do with this? The first time I was there, I felt like I needed to be kind of have my hand held through the whole process. And I don't know, maybe this is a pretty bad illustration, but I kind of feel like that's what it was like for these church people when the church first came out. They were kind of used to God. They had heard of God, but they had this law, and now they're being told they don't have to obey that law. And so there's all this freedom, and they need some help. So this guy, Paul, comes along, and he writes this letter, and the letter basically explains what it means to be a Christian. The letter to the Romans. The first 11 chapters, and this will make sense in just a second, so hang with me, right? The first 11 chapters are all about what Christians believe. And then 12 through 16 are all about what Christians do, how they live, right? Paul knew it. He had been trained by some good people. He's like, this church in Rome, they really need some help. I'm going to write this letter. So he goes off and he writes this letter of how to be a Christian. Now, if you're like me, the first half, remember, very, very spiritual, chapters 1 through 11. It's all like what we believe, what Christians believe. Second half, very practical. Now, if you're like me, I'm a really practical person. I just kind of want to be told what to do. I don't need to hear the whole story behind it. Maybe it's because I'm in a little bit of a rush too much, right? But it's kind of like, okay, all right, get to the point here. It's kind of like in school. You know how sometimes your teachers will give you books, and you get a book for your curriculum or whatever, and you look at the book and you're like, oh, I really got to read this book. But then there's other books that you get where you're kind of like, I'll watch the movie, Right? Okay, so that's how I kind of handled the first 11 chapters of Romans, where it's just like, all right, I'll skip that and just get me to the part where it's what I have to do, right? And so here it is, chapter 12, verse 1 in the book of Romans, where they explain what it is we have to do. He says this, he says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. There are some spiritual words, right? He says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And there it is. There's the to-do in
Romans 12, verse 1. There's the first, okay, go out and get this done. And this, not only is it the first to do, but it's the first topic. It's like the topic sentence for the rest of the book, right? So it's as if he's saying, fine, this is, you've got to offer everything you are, everything you have, your hopes, your dreams, your future, your plan, the way you act, the way you think. Like, it's as if, and they would have been acquainted with the sacrificial system, it's as if he's saying, you know how you used to bring stuff to the altar for God? Well, now I want you to bring your whole entire life. Offer it all to God. And because that's where my faith started, that's where I started reading, so to speak. That's how I understood Christianity. That was the version of Christianity that I adopted. Give all to God, everything. And so my line of thinking was kind of all right, God wants me to sacrifice. He wants me to give everything, wants me to live my life for him. This is pleasing to him. I want to please God. I'm supposed to please God. This is how I worship. God wants me to worship. If I want God to like me, if I want God to accept me, then I've got to do what he says. And so the operating assumption of my faith, of the version of Christianity that I adopted, basically said, if he will. If I obey him, he will accept me. If I listen to him, he will love me. If I can muster up enough faith to trust him, well then he'll take care of me. It starts with, and it's built on my performance. What I do for God. This is how I understood Christianity for years. And what I found is that in a lot of places, this is the version of Christianity that's presented to those outside the church. It's well, if you obey God, if you do what he says, he will accept you. And maybe that sounds okay to you if you've been in the church for a long time, but if you haven't, that's kind of a hard thing to do. There's some God up in heaven, and yes, I get he's bigger than me. I get he's stronger than me. I get he's been around longer than I have, but really, I don't know him. I have to give everything for him. Give up what I want to do for what he wants to do. He wants me to do. Who would do that? The reasoning there is that because God's bigger and stronger, we have to give everything to him and do what he says. And so this produces one of two things. It either scares people into the church. They come in because they feel like they have to and they're afraid of what God is going to do to them. Or it pushes people out. And this is why we have people who are hostile to the Christian faith, who don't want to talk about it, who don't want you to bring it up, because it's just a reminder of what might happen. And this is how I grew up for years. For years. In fact, if I'm being honest with you, I almost hoped I'd run into some college professor somewhere that would tell me something that totally disproved the Christian faith, just so I didn't have to think about it. Just so I'd have that weight lifted off of me. And that's the version, if I obey him, he will accept me. It starts with me and what I do. And what's even worse is that sometimes this way of thinking, this operating assumption, this motivational structure of the heart can creep into the church. With people on the inside. It's something I think we probably have to fight on a regular basis. But so what we do is we kind of we white knuckle the Christian life. right? We like try as hard as we can to get it right. And what happens then is because the way God feels about us is based on our performance, and because our performance is not always where it should be, life is just up and down and up and down. It's like, okay, I did really good today. God must love me. Oh, I failed. I said something to my wife I shouldn't have said. He must hate me. And it's up and down and up and down. It's an exhausting roller coaster. It's like on one day you wake up and it's like, well, I prayed 3 times today and I read the book of Haggai. God must be thrilled with me, right? And then other days it's like, I totally blew it. It's exhausting. It's like a cycle. For me, it was this cycle of motivation, condemnation, rededication, right? Like one day I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it, but then I blow it. And then I hate myself for blowing it, so then it's condemnation. And then it's like, all right, I'm going to try and fix it, right? So then we go to rededication. And then after rededicating, I get motivated again, and then I blow it again. And then we go back to condemnation. And it's this exhausting cycle. And not just that, but it also makes us judgmental. It's what makes Christians angry. Because it's this feeling like, if I'm going to carry this burden, if I'm going to live this way, then you should have to too. And so when we see people who are doing things that we're not supposed to do, it makes us angry, it makes us jealous, right? Because we're trapped in this cycle of obedience and we're scared of what's going to happen if we disobey God. And it's all because if I obey him, he will accept me. But there's one word that changes everything. There's one word that takes Christianity from unattractive to irresistible. It takes the Christian life from obligation to invitation. And that word, it's not super sexy. There's no fancy Greek meaning behind it. The word in this verse that changes everything is therefore. Therefore. You see, therefore cannot be a starting point to an understanding of the Christian faith. When you see the word therefore, it means what comes next is contingent on what was just said. Therefore has kind of become one of those Bible words you just breeze over. But if you take out the word therefore, you can put in the phrase, so because of that. If this verse started with, so because of that, I urge you, you'd be like, because of what? Right? What Paul's saying here is that all of this whole idea of offering your life, all of this is completely contingent and totally rests on chapters 1 through 11 in his letter to Romans. All this stuff I said, the spiritual stuff, right? What Christians are supposed to believe, that's what influences Christian behavior. So Paul starts out really simply. He explains the brokenness of the human race. He explains how people are trapped in a cycle of pain, like on this constant search for satisfaction, for some kind of gratification. He says that people have traded the truth for a lie. They've settled for less. And so because of that, they're just trapped in this horrible, horrible system of pain and are totally helpless. Totally helpless. And then he explains how in that state, in that helpless state, when people were at their worst, unable to do everything, haters of God, that's when Jesus shows up on the scene. Not when like the human race got together and we were like, all right, guys, let's try and get our act together and see if God will take us back. No, when the human race was at its absolute worst, God steps into the picture. And what Paul writes is that to demonstrate his love for us while we were sinners, as far away from God as we could be, that's when Jesus gave everything for us. At our worst, some of us think that like when we're doubting, when we're messed up, that God is disappointed with us or he wants nothing from us. But the heart of what we call the gospel, the good news, is that God loves you in spite, not because of, but in spite of your performance. And it changes everything. And then Paul goes on in chapter 8. He explains more of what Jesus has done. And in chapter 8 of Romans, I think this is my favorite part of the whole book, he gets to this point. He's like, so what do we say to all this? Like, what shall we say to this? If God is for us, then who can be against us? He says, how would he who did not spare his own son, but freely gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, freely give us all things? In other words, what he's saying is, if Jesus would lay down his life for you at your worst when you least deserve it, what else does he have to do to prove that he is in this for you? That he loves you, that he's crazy about you. And so the message of chapters 1 through 11 is that there is a God in heaven who loves you like crazy, who is in pursuit of your heart, no matter how far or close you are to him. No matter how good or bad you are, his love is greater than you can wrap your mind around. And he is for you. He is in your corner. He wants to see you flourish. And so, hear this, right? And so because of that, Paul writes, therefore, I urge you. The word there in the original language is like to encourage, to invite, to exhort. He says, I urge you, therefore, because of that, because you have a God who is crazy about you, I urge you, in view of his mercy, in view of everything I just took 11 chapters to explain, to offer yourselves to him, to present yourselves to him as a living sacrifice. They knew sacrifice back then, they knew it was really used for one of two reasons. You sacrificed either to make up for your sin or to express gratitude. And Paul just spent 11 chapters explaining how Jesus' sacrifice covered sin. What he's saying is, in light of all this, live your lives as an expression of gratitude to God. Because he's in this for you. He says it's holy and pleasing to God. Holy, it means different. It means set apart. He's saying it's not going to be how everybody else lives. And pleasing to God, it brings him joy. He says this is your true and proper worship. The word there in the original language is the word logikos in Greek. It's where we get the word that means logical. It's like he's stepping back and saying, look, this is really the only logical thing to do. If this God has gone to such great extents to prove that he loves you, the only logical way to respond is to offer yourself to him. Not because you owe him, but because he's for you. So, behind this therefore is a because he. The Christian life is not if he will. It's a because I will. You see, one starts and is built on our performance, the way we live, the way we act, when we get it right and when we get it wrong. And the other one is based on him and his performance. Because he accepts me in Jesus, I will obey him. Because he loves me, I will listen to him. Because he has proven that he's in this for me, I'll live my life for him. Because he has shown that he cares for me, I'll trust him. Because I will. Not if he will. If you like to take notes, if you like to write things down, here's what I want you to remember. The Christian life is a response to God's love. It is not the requirement for it. It starts with what he's done. And we're left to respond to his radical love for us. It's a totally different motivational structure in the heart. And so what I want to ask you is, are you living from a place of if I, or a place of because he? Is your life like, are you working to meet requirements? Or do you understand that your requirements have been met in Jesus on the cross, and now you're left to respond to his radical love for you? Is your faith heavy, or is it light, like Jesus said it should be? And if you're one of those people that's actively resisting the Christian faith, like I said, I get that. I've been there. And if you're resisting the if I, he will model, I'd like to encourage you to keep resisting that model. But if you're resisting the because he, I will model, then you are missing out on something of infinite value. Here's a story I'll leave you with. I have a daughter. She's 5 years old. A couple years ago, we kind of had this habit in my house where we'd ask my daughter to do something, and then we'd reward her for doing it. And whenever, it'd be like she loves snacks, or maybe like a little toy or whatever, and I would give her a toy or a snack or whenever she got something right, and I would look at her and I'd say, Mia, do you know why you're getting this? And she would say, no, Daddy, why? And I would say, it's because you're a good girl. And that kind of became a habit, and so every time she was rewarded for doing something right, I'd say, hey, Mia, you know why you're getting this? And she'd say, because I'm a good girl. And it was fine, I'm not trying to give you parenting tips, right? But at one point, I stopped. I stopped doing that. I stopped saying that because I was concerned that me doing that was teaching her that my love for her is contingent on her performance. And so one day she did something right or whatever, and I wanted to reward her for it, and I reached out and I gave her something. I said, Mia, do you know why you're getting this? And she said, because I'm a good girl. And I said, no, it's because I love you. And she looked at me and she said, no, it's because I'm a good girl. And I wonder if there will be a day where we'll be in heaven with Jesus. And maybe one day he'll look at us and he'll say, hey, do you know why you're here? And if you're like me, you'd probably sit there and try to start listing things off to prove that you've been a good boy or a good girl. But in that moment, I bet he would stop us and say, oh no, it's because I love you. And so, therefore, I urge you, my brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your lives as a living sacrifice, a living expression of gratitude to God. How else could we possibly respond?
Well, thanks for hanging out with us this week. I hope that message was an encouragement to you. Maybe it was a reminder, or maybe it was something that you learned for the first time. But either way, I hope it was a benefit to you. And if you're new, don't forget to head over to communitychurch.net/connect. Fill out that form just to let us know you were here. But until next time, have a great week.